final speaker for the evening, Naveen. Is well known in the New York technology circles, built a product that actually almost got me killed twice. I remember when I used to work at my previous job, I was just leaving the building and remembered, oh, I haven't checked into Foursquare. And while I was crossing the road, I was checking into Foursquare. So I went home, I deleted my Foursquare account. After a while, I said, okay, I gotta get back on it again. Happened the second time, and I deleted my account for the second time. But it's a highly addictive product that really needs no introduction. And there's a lot we can learn from Naveen about building a company, building a culture, retaining talent. And would love to hear what you have to say. Okay.
Hi, so I'm Naveen, as you just introduced. I'm one of the co-founders of Foursquare, but I'm also now head of platform. So what that means is that I focus on building our APIs, focus on building better tools for developers, manage the developer community, go give talks. I just try to learn from how we can partner with others, how we can work with other people's data, how others can work off of our data. So tonight's talk is about developer culture. This is the first time I've ever really given such a talk about culture. I think occasionally we answer Q&As about what it is like to work at Foursquare, but I've never actually tried to collect all the stories and tell it in one piece. So we'll see how it goes. I've nicknamed this talk Culture Apocalypse because it's a meme that's actually very prevalent in Foursquare. So anytime there's like a big snowstorm, you see like snowpocalypse and people will be starting to check into it. So yeah, I'll start by just going over a quick overview of the story of Foursquare. I know most of you already know the story, but I think it's kind of nice to just get an overview of the last 2.5 years. We started by launching the product at South by Southwest 2 years ago in March of 2009 in Austin. And the idea was, and this was kind of like our very simple tagline, very playful tagline, so to speak, was let's go out there and create something using our phone, something that we're always carrying around with us that makes our cities easy to use. So, finding friends nearby, leading to more serendipitous meetups or interesting things together, exploring new things from our friends, seeing tips, getting recommendations, that sort of stuff. And Foursquare takes a few different parts, but I think the most important things are obviously the idea of a check-in and the idea of this almost this timeline that shows you where all your friends are in a city. So this real-time dashboard of where everybody's going, what they're doing, what their life is like, what their favorite places are like. Another idea that we launched with is this idea of lists, one of them being the to-do list. So not only can you see where your friends are, but you can actually act on these things. You can actually save them to your to-do list so you can come back later so that it'll remind you. And you can learn about things to go to from all sorts of different things. You can learn about them from where your friends are, obviously. So you see like, my friend Kristen goes to Ajisai a lot. This is a new Japanese restaurant that I've never been to, so I'll add it to my list. You can learn about things when you're reading about them online. So let's say you're reading about something on New York Magazine. You can tap a quick bookmark and add it to your list so that you can be reminded later. And then what we've done over the last 6 months to 8 months is that we've taken all the data that we've collected over the last 2 years and built even more interesting products on top of the existing platform. So because we've been collecting so many data points about check-ins and about tips and recommendations, we've been able to collate all of that, put all of it together, run some numbers and some algorithms over it, and then return recommendations in the form of this thing that we're calling Explore. So you tap Explore, it knows where you've been in the past, it knows roughly what kind of things you like, it knows where your friends have been, and it tries to use that data to actually recommend more interesting experiences for you in the city. So we're only 2.5 years old, a baby. We're now almost 80 people. A little more than half that is actually engineers. The engineering team is the biggest team in the company. Product team is probably the second biggest. So product team includes people like designers and front-end guys and product managers. And the engineering team includes everyone from server engineering all the way to client engineering, testers and data scientists and all that stuff. We now have more than 10 million users on the platform. We have more than 500 million check-ins at this point. So these are the things that actually power the recommendations and everything else that you see. Roughly 50% of the traffic, 50% of the users are actually international. So this is actually a very global service. You're not actually seeing usage in the US, where obviously we launched, or in Europe, but Tokyo and Korea and Brazil and all these different places have become more and more popular. We've recorded a check-in from every single country in the world. As of last week. We're now 11 languages, including English. And this is actually a kind of an infographic of all the check-ins from last year. So not the 600 million number that I just threw out there. These are 381 million check-ins just in 2010 alone. So we launched in 2009. And what's most interesting about this graph, I always show this, what's most interesting that I find is that it's very similar to the night sky, because if you were to look from space at night at Earth, it would reflect something along these lines. So it's very concentrated in the big cities. It's really where people are. So that's very exciting to see. So we tend to think of ourselves as a very engineering and product focused culture. And I think this is because this is who Dennis and I are. Dennis is very much a product guy, more of an engineer. And we have a little bit of, he has a little bit of engineering in him, I have a little bit of product in me. So that's the culture that we've started since day one. That's the culture we bring to the company, and that's how we've kind of built a team around it. And hiring has always been a very, very important thing for us. At first, it was just Dennis and me. So for almost the first year of our existence, it was just the two of us doing everything. So from press to design to coding on the iPhone app to coding on the server to you name it, whatever needed to happen kind of went through us. And then the first round of hires, we basically brought on our friends. I mean, who better to bring onto your company than people that you really know? You know their work, you work well with them, you get along with them, they think and are very equally passionate about the product that you're trying to build. So that was really easy. So we brought on Harry and Mike and all of these other guys, both front end and back end, as well as to fill out other parts of the team. Our community manager, Chrysanthi, who I believe was our 9th hire, was someone that we'd known from the New York community for like 3 or 4 years. We'd gone to parties and things like that with her. And then the second round of hires, I guess, are friends of friends. We basically tapped into their networks, their frat buddies and their other smart people that they went to college with or that they knew from New York City. And then there was a little bit of a lull in 2010 where it was really, well, we were growing like crazy. There was a lot of like internal kind of challenges in terms of like keeping the service up, dealing with all the inbound requests, both on the customer side and the user side, I should say, as well as brands and everyone else. And then there were a lot of, it's just hiring is a job unto itself. It's almost like a full-time thing that you have to do. But it's very hard to do when you're working on 17 other things. And we kind of got into this period of how do we actually hire better? How do we actually do this? And eventually we actually ended up solving that problem by bringing on our first recruiter. So this didn't happen until a year and a half after we launched. So October of last year was when she finally joined. And then since then we've had 2 other recruiters who help us, one in San Francisco, 2 here in New York. And this has really boosted our hiring because everything goes through them. They're very, very smart. They're technically minded recruiters. They go through a whole bunch of resumes and interested candidates from all around the US and all around the world. And they kind of filter. They kind of do the first pass of, here are interesting people that you guys could probably go through. They set up the meetings, and then our engineering team goes through their 5 or 6 back-to-back interviews. And I think for the past 2 years, our hiring emphasis has always been on senior level people. So very rarely have we actually brought on people that are fresh out of college. We've actually, almost always hired people that have had a lot of experience, that have built things, either at startups or places like Google or Microsoft or Twitter or any one of these companies. And I think that's really formed something very unique because these guys bring on a lot of experience. These guys have made mistakes in the past. You learn through mistakes, right? They've had many successes in the past. They've built great teams. They know the right tools to use. So all of these things actually are very, very powerful. So these are guys from like the early days was Pivotal and a lot of Google, a few from Microsoft and Amazon. But also importantly, other startups, guys that are actually trying to start their own things, and they decided to join forces with us. And they bring good things. They bring great perspective because they bring their leadership qualities and the way they think about problem sets. They think very differently about scaling because they've built for many millions of users. They're not starting over and trying to build something for 10 or 20,000 people. And they bring a lot of value in terms of how do you think about process, how do you think about management and responsibility and all that stuff. And at some point last summer, we also opened up a temporary San Francisco office. And in May of this year, we actually opened up a permanent one. We were subletting from about September, October of last year to about May of this year. And the reason we opened the San Francisco office was because there were a lot of people that were just really great that were in San Francisco. They wanted to work out of that space. And we decided, why not give them a space to actually be there? So our first couple of biz dev hires, Tristan being one of them and Holger the other, are both based in the Bay Area, as well as a couple of the engineers that came around last year. And then since then, we've realized that there was a lot of great talent in San Francisco as well. So we've opened up a more permanent office, and we started to hire more aggressively out there. This is actually a picture of an always-on portal that's at the office. This is one of 3 always-on portals, and it makes it very easy in case you have to have meetings or see someone face-to-face. So this is facing the San Francisco office, the loft space, and there's another camera that's actually sitting just down below that faces the New York office. So at any given point, you can see who's in the office. You get a sense of almost like being there. And all you have to do is stand up and start talking to them. So it's been a very cool addition. I'm going to fast forward into tools because I'll talk about tools first because we've kind of tried a few different things and then ended up with some things that seem to work really well as some things that we built internally. And I'll come back to talking about process and a little bit of the fun elements of Foursquare. In the early days, we actually tried the Bill Tracker and Basecamp. We tried the tracker tools for, particularly on the client team, just to keep track of all the things we had to do, keep track of how well we're doing them, how quickly we're moving, what's our velocity, how quickly can we actually get features out, and then let that determine how well we'll be able to do over the next 2 weeks or the next 3 weeks. We also tried Basecamp, most particularly on the product side of things, so we do it for uploading screenshots and sharing mocks and stuff like that. But for various reasons, mainly because they just didn't encourage the same type of discussion and ease in discussion, we actually abandoned them because a lot of the discussion we found actually went back over email. And email is a very lively channel. It forms a very lively debate no matter what team you're on, whether you're on engineering or on a product team. So in addition to obviously in-person meetings, email allows people to really flesh out their thoughts and arguments. And it's actually been much more valuable than any one of these tools. So we eventually moved off them. And then eventually kind of everything shook loose, and we eventually ended up using mostly these 3 tools. Campfire, mostly for all the engineers, so the engineers are almost in there every day. And Campfire is very good because it makes all the engineers pretty accessible. There's also a group meet that all the server engineers are a member of, in case anything goes wrong with the servers or someone needs to look at something, everyone gets blasted, and the first person to respond takes over. Campfire is great because it encourages not only the fun, playful conversation that engineers normally have throughout the day, but it also allows you to keep in touch with what everybody else is working on. When something goes wrong, you know who's available, who's taking it. When a build goes out or when a build fails, you actually see this in Campfire. So it provides this very natural, very open discussion forum as well as a log of what's going on. We tried a couple of different things. I want to say we tried Bugzilla for a little bit. We obviously tried Tracker for bug tracking, and then we eventually ended up on Fogbugs because it allows us to separate the various platforms we're working on. So not only are we on iPhone, but we develop BlackBerry and Android internally, as well as all the server tools. It seemed to have the most number of, most flexibility in terms of how we could organize all of our tickets, how we could sort all of them, how we could group them, and then how we can essentially manage releases to make sure the right things are getting into each release. And then recently we've actually started trying out Asana, particularly for things like a couple of the newer releases, like the tip list, for instance, which you saw, which we launched about 2 weeks ago. But there really is no one magic sort of bullet that solves all these problems. Communication, kind of group communication in particular, is still a hybrid of email and a couple of different tools. There's no one simple answer to it. So we've tried a lot of things, and this seems to be working pretty well at this point. Yeah, and then we rely heavily on Gmail and Google Docs for storing stuff. We've tried a couple of different things. We actually tried a wiki for hosting documentation, because a wiki has logging, and a lot of people can edit it simultaneously, but eventually just ended up at the simplest possible thing, which is mail and docs. We've also written a whole bunch of homemade tools, tools and processes, I should say. OKRs is actually something that I think came from GE, I could be wrong, but they're something that we actually learned from Google. Google used to do this thing called objectives and key results. So at the beginning of every quarter, they'd write down goals. They'd write down team goals as well as personal goals. And then they'd set metrics to them. So they would say, the goal for this quarter is to get to 1 million users. Here's how we do that. And then each person or each team would do those things, and then at the end of the quarter, measure themselves against how well they did against the 1 million mark, or whatever it was. So we tried this for a little bit, and it seemed to work pretty well, but we kind of bucketed this into this quarter by quarter kind of mentality, which we were eventually outgrew because we wanted to get stuff out much faster. We wanted to get stuff out on a bi-weekly basis or even on a weekly basis. We wanted to push out stuff much more quickly than this gave us flexibility to. Another thing that we actually wrote was this internal tool called Snippets. Every Monday morning, early on Monday morning, everyone gets sent an email that says, what did you do in the last week? Or what are your goals for this current coming week? You simply respond to that email, so every person in the company gets their own email. They respond to it individually. And it keeps track of a log. It actually goes into a central logging system. And then at the end of the Monday, on Monday night, it actually emails everybody's logs to everyone else. So if I got an email this morning, I would respond to it. I'd say, here are the things that I did. Here's what I want to speak. Here are the things that I'm thinking about. And we collate that, and then blast it off to everybody else. And everyone can follow and kind of keep up with what I'm doing, which is really an interesting way of being transparent, number one. And number two, providing a way for you to keep track of all the things that you did, obviously. So it serves as kind of a diary, so that if you have to look back on it a year from now, or even 2 weeks from now, you get a sense of like, what were you doing, how productive you were, notes or reminders that you wanted to leave yourself. And three, it solves a problem, or it tries to, of staying more closely in touch with each other. So you get to see like, hey, what are the server team guys are working on? What are things that I might potentially be able to help with on the community team? You get a sense of like, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis? Because I think the bigger you grow, the less you have time to actually keep up with what everyone else is, what's on everyone else's minds. And lastly, we made a tool about 2 months ago called Overshare. So we're now almost 80 people, and we often made this joke, when are we going to get to the point that we're not going to be able to remember someone's name? So we made a tool called Overshare, actually named after one of our badges. And the idea is, it is a tool in 2 different parts. Part one is the directory, so everyone has a profile in it. Picture what you do at the company, what are your current kind of product focuses, all the things that you're thinking about, and then personal interests, a little something about yourself, your Twitter handle, your Foursquare handle. And the other half is sort of this very fun game. So you're given 10 seconds per person, you're shown a picture, and you basically have to guess who it is. And the faster you guess, the more points you get. And then Foursquare being what it is, we basically made a leaderboard out of all this stuff in order to encourage people to do it more often and try to climb on top of the leaderboard. So again, it's a very fun way, especially now that we have a remote team, to try to keep in touch with and recognize people by faces and learn each other's names and what they do. Trying to shrink the size of the company in some ways. Side note, we'll take a little break. Food is obviously very important to engineers and just companies in general. So initially what we did was we started catering, we started delivering food or getting food delivered anytime there were really crazy deadlines, when we were staying late at the office, before South by Southwest, let's say, or when a big thing had to get out. So if you stay late at the office, we just get you food. And then eventually that sort of morphed into this idea that we should do food maybe twice a week. So twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays we deliver lunch. This has the benefit that you stay at the office, everybody orders together, you eat together, you talk about stuff together. If it's rainy like it is today, you don't have to go out. And maybe you don't have that interruption in the middle of the day. You just sail through it, you get lunch delivered to your desk, and you get through whatever you're working on. And then occasionally we'll have surprises. We'll have pizza delivered every once in a while. A couple of friends of ours will send us food every once in a while, or when people travel, they'll actually bring back stuff. So this week there was a lot of chocolate at the office, like Hawaiian chocolates and all this stuff. People went on vacation at the end of summer, and they brought back a lot of cool stuff. So again, the kitchen and the food really forms a different conversation, a very fun environment for people to get out of their desks, talk to someone else, talk over food, talk about food, whatever it is. Talk about process, I guess. Some of the things that we're still learning. So we're still only 2.5 years old. Just to some point, we don't know all the answers. We don't know exactly, how the team is going to behave in the future, how we're going to do stuff in the future. We don't have any. I guess we're just constantly learning as we go along. And these are some of the things that have worked and are currently working. One of the ideas is, to always be launching, whether that's internally, just to your team, or to all the employees on whatever you're working on, or always be launching externally. We try to do regular rollouts. So right now it's 3 times a week on the server side. We're trying to get this to maybe once a day. And then who knows where we can go from that. Make sure that everybody's empowered to actually go do this. Every time code rolls out on the server side, we actually play Ludacris's rollout. So this is how you know that there's like a big release that's coming up. Music is actually a very, very big thing at the office. We have a Sonos, and we have kind of many different DJs. The way Sonos works is that you can basically import any playlist from your iTunes, from your Spotify, or any one of these things, Rhapsody. And so anyone in the room could be a DJ. So music has formed and become a very important kind of player in the way we think and the way we work in the company. And on the client team, we stagger releases across platforms so that we don't wait until, hey, let's just get this feature out on every single platform. We'll do like iPhone first, Android, BlackBerry, a few days later, a few days between each other. And then very much like the server team, we actually have multiple branches that work at the same time. So on iPhone, for instance, let's say the photos team could be working on putting photos in the iPhone app. The tips team could be working on better tips on the iPhone app. And both of these releases are available for download simultaneously. So as long as you're an employee, you can download them, you can test it out, you can provide feedback, and you can kind of keep up with the progress of the engineers at the same time the engineers and the product team is working on something. And on the server side, we do something very similar. They're internal employee-only features. So as you're browsing the website, there are certain things that only employees can see. It's our way of testing it out, making sure the icons line up properly, making sure the functionality works quickly enough, making sure it looks good across all browsers, making sure it works for the employee that only has a few friends or someone that has a lot of friends. How does it work against scale and a lot of images? And we do something similar on the client side. We actually call it Beta Blast. I think there's a startup called TestFlight, which actually allows you to click a link and download a beta version of the app. We built something like that internally that by clicking a single link, you can download any one of the different branches that the team is working on right to your phone and start using it. I mention it only because it used to be a very, very hard thing. Back about 6 months or 8 months ago on iPhone, in order to actually download a beta release, you had to go download the app on your computer and then sync your phone with your computer. It was a very complicated process, so it's really simplified. And then everyone in the company gets to launch something. All the engineers, I should say, gets to launch something that goes live. So you're actually working on real product, on real code, on stuff that actually makes a difference. So even the interns, one of the interns worked on all the language localization. So the last 5 languages we did, you got to work on it. And it's just a very fun experience. No matter whether you've been there for a long time or whether you're just kind of cutting code for 2 months in the summer, you get to see something, and I think that's the most rewarding thing ever. You're not just in there working on something that no one sees. I think that's a very powerful thing. It's actually one of the things that I believe motivates developers more than anything else. Is if you look at the open source community, it's the same thing. It's the satisfaction in getting stuff out there that people are using. I think we have a lot of that. More recently, we started doing sessions internally. So because the team is growing so big, it's just very hard to keep track of what's what. I haven't touched, for instance, any of the iPhone code since like January. I don't really know what's going on in it. So occasionally I'll sit in on talks that the iPhone team or the server team gives. There's one that the server team gives that's called the life of a check-in. So what happens from the moment that someone in the room presses the check-in button to in the back end, and like where is it stored, where does it go, how is it cached, how does it actually get distributed to everyone else. There's another one that was done recently by one of our iPhone developers, Adu, which he's actually taken. He actually initially gave it as a session internally at Foursquare, but he's since taken that, he's released some of that code, so it's actually in our GitHub, and he's actually taken that talk and he's actually given it externally, so iPhone developers meet us and things like that. So these are actually very concrete start and finish sort of situations. They're not just open discussions. We're trying to do this more often. I want to say probably about once every quarter we try to do this thing called Fix It Week. And right now we're actually in the middle of a Fix It Week that lasted last week as well as this. And the idea of a Fix It Week is that we're rushing and we're getting stuff out so fast. We're getting all these features out. I mean, this was a summer of just endless feature releases. So at the end of the summer we decided, let's just slow things down a bit. Let's go back and kind of optimize and streamline and really make some of that code more efficient. Let's refactor, let's rewrite some of that stuff. Or let's go back and fix some of the things that we've always wanted to fix, right? We've always wanted to implement this one thing, we just never got the time because we had all these other deadlines. So the idea of Fix It Week is that the engineering team basically takes a break for 2 weeks and just focuses on streamlining, optimizing, moving things around in the back end. And at the end of the Fix It Week, what we normally do is we just have a hack day. At some point we'd love to do like Hack Week or something like that, but we're just testing out the idea. For a day you just get to work on whatever it is that you want to see in the product. And the hack days have actually resulted in actual features that have gone out both on the client side as well as the server side. One of the things that I think is very important in a company, obviously, no matter how big it is communication. It's going to get harder and harder as we grow bigger, or big companies probably have an even harder time than small. But it's something that we take very, very seriously and very close to us. Communication has a lot to do with transparency. So it's not just talking about talking to someone one-on-one, but I think it has a lot to do with what is actually going on overall at the company. So we try to be very open about sharing things in team meetings, allowing people to ask questions of us. We try to make sure that people can talk and people can be empowered to speak up, whether it's about product or about some engineering thing or whatever it is. We're very open, obviously, about the roadmap and where we're going and all the things that we're thinking about doing, in the next few months or over the next few years. And I think this is also important. Again, it empowers, no matter whether you're the newest developer on the team or one of the most senior guys, to really get an idea. Yeah, I'm actually a part of this. I'm actually a part of this ride. And I can actually, stick my hand up and ask questions and speak up and ask for changes. We have, we're trying to cut down the number of meetings. I think this is one of the things that most people hate, obviously, no matter where you are. And we started doing more stand-up meetings in lieu of actually sitting down with your notes and with your computers and all this stuff. And the idea of a stand-up, for the most part, is just catching up everyone on what you've been doing. So for certain features, what we'll actually do is everyone that's working on the feature, so whether you're on the design team or the engineering team or the client team, we'll actually get together for 5 minutes every morning, and you'll give an update on what you've been doing the day before, what things are blocking you, what things you're going to be working on today and the rest of the week. And it's a very quick catch-up. This is not going to go over email. It's not going to go over, in an actual big-time meeting. It's a very quick way of offering help where it needs to be help, where other people might need help. It's a quick way of catching up on what's going on. Another thing we've actually experimented with to much success is this idea of team lists. Initially, I think we called them Delta teams. We call them Delta teams because there would be 3 people: designer, server team, and client team. Because that's essentially because we're a very client-focused, mobile-focused app. It's those 3 people that usually fit together. And they've morphed into this idea of team lists. And team lists are basically groups of people that are chosen to work on a product, on a feature, I should say. And they're usually self-selected. And the idea of teamlets is that each teamlet gets its own mailing list, each teamlet will have its own stand-up, and they basically rapidly iterate on what they're doing within the teamlet and then report back to the rest of the team occasionally in order to set direction and where to go. And it's actually worked out really well because they get to try out different things, they get to do A/B testing if necessary, they get to play with the different revisions of the apps in their hands, and iterate much more quickly than would a bigger product team or a bigger engineering team. And again, related to this as well is this idea of having open mailing lists all throughout the company. So anyone can actually go in and join any mailing list that they want to, if they're interested. So let's say you're interested in the tip list and the direction the tip list is going, you're welcome to join it. You can also go and keep up with the archives. You can see where is this actually going? Where are the screenshots going? Where's the wireframe? Where are the mockups? I want to actually help test the tip list, for instance. So you can actually join it and start doing that. So anyone at the company can do this. So if you're an engineer, you don't have to be shy and say, well, I'm focused on this back-end thing. If you're really into tip lists, you should join and give your feedback. So we help engineers be more vocal about the product. I just touched briefly about Campfire, which is lending to some more idea of accessibility. Anyone is empowered to jump in and say, hey, this little thing doesn't work, what's going on? And the engineer will usually speak up. So it's a forum to talk to any of the engineers. It's not like the engineers on one side of the room, you're all the way over here and you're afraid to work over. And lastly, the company's just filled with many different personalities that just grew out of initially our friends, as I mentioned, and then just who people are. And people bring whatever interest that they have back into the company, and they've started their own initiatives. So there's a whole crew that's just totally into biking, either for commuting or for racing. There's another crew that's just into running. So they'll set up challenges and go on races together. There are a couple actually running the marathon. There's a funny thing that I want to mention. There was Pete, who's one of our BlackBerry developers, had never run before, and there was some internal bet that was going on about some product things. So they challenged him to run. They challenged him that he couldn't run a mile without training, and he actually ended up doing a pretty good job. I think he got a sub 7 mile. This month, what we're doing, this is the second time I think we're doing this. We're trying to be healthier and we're trying to be fitter, as much as we love eating and going out. So we've started using the product called Health Month, where we each set individual goals for ourselves. And obviously, there's a leaderboard. And what we try to do is compete against each other. We set goals. So this month, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink sodas. I'm trying to get exercise more. And then everyone has their own goals, and we're just trying to do all this stuff together. Another thing that's just been sort of just thought up by the users, the employees, and their different ideas, is this idea that is this idea of Thai Tuesdays. It initially started out as Thai Tuesdays, and I think this started about March or April of last year. And since then, other companies have actually looked at this idea and they've said, hey, we want to do this as well. In the summer, and later in summer, when it got really too hot to wear a full sleeve shirt and a tie, Thai Tuesdays actually morphed into Headband Tuesdays. So we had custom headbands made for everybody. And then eventually that somehow morphed into Thai Tuesdays. And then more recently, it's just shortened to Tuesdays, where we play songs or artists that have two of their names. So just a very fun kind of, this is the kind of stuff that happens every day at the company. Feel free to email me or tweet at me if you have any questions. And of course, we're hiring, so we'd love to see more great developers join the team.
Before we open it up to questions, I have one question for you.
Yeah.
As you get business pressures to build products quicker and faster, and one of the things that helps retain good talent is the ability to give them interesting projects to work on and to build a lot of software in-house. In a company like yours, which is grown from a startup to a bigger company, how do you deal with the challenges of balancing in-house development versus the pressure to, say, purchase a vendor product or use vendor products?
So at the moment, we've never really had to make any big decisions like that. I meant to mention our stack. We're all on Amazon, so S3, EC2, and all that stuff. We use MongoDB, another Neo company. We use Twilio for some kind of venue phone number recognition stuff. And that's pretty much it. We don't really have too many external dependencies. We rely a lot on open source code, for instance, and where possible, we actually contribute code back into the community. And to go back to the first question you were asking, usually when we hire an engineer, we try to make sure that we get an idea of what they're into. So if they're really into data, we try to put them closer to the data team. If they really want to work on front end, on UX, we're not going to put them on some back end team that they're going to be bored in 2 or 3 months. We're going to try to put them on the front end team. So we think a lot about where do we place them, what are their interests, and then obviously we're sensitive to where they want to grow and where they want to go in the future. We're still very young, but I'm sure that day is going to come where we're going to say, oh yeah, you've been spending 2 years doing this, maybe you want to try that. So like I said, a lot of this is just learning and just being very open and learning from them and learning as we go. I don't think any one person has the answer. I think you just have to grow organically.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's fine. We'd like to invite all the speakers and open it up to questions, and after that we have cocktails right outside this room.
Okay, great. Yeah.
We have a microphone for so questions, anyone, and for any of the speakers or for us here.
Can I just leave this here?
Hi, thanks for all 3 talks, really interesting stuff. They've been interested in the concept of teamlets. You talked a little bit about the org structure and how you divide up work among the engineering teams. Would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay. Do you have to turn this on? Yes. Hello. I think we had something like Teamlets last summer. Last year our team was much smaller, so we're now at 80-something people. At this same point last year, I think we were maybe 26, 27 people. Our team was really small. So imagine only half those were engineers. So the way stuff happened back then was, almost there was only one kind of mailing list for product or engineering. A couple of the engineers would get roped into certain product decisions. Product decisions we would make for the product team, engineers would get roped in. Here's how you do it, and you just have all the conversation over email. But as the team grew bigger and bigger, there's no need for everyone to see everything. As the team grew bigger, what happens is you don't work on just one thing at a time, or 2 things at a time. You tend to work on 4 or 5. So that brought about this idea of like these delta teams or these teamlets, where usually the engineering lead and the product lead say, this UX guy and these 2 engineers, and the client team lead would say, this iPhone engineer is going to work on this one thing. So let's say tip lists, and they all get together and they form the teamlet. So they usually appointed sometimes some of the engineers can speak up and say, I really want to work on tubeless, and they'll get put on the team. And the Teamlet gets its own mailing list. Teamlet gets their own stand-ups. The overall product direction and specs and all that stuff is coming from, and the roadmap is controlled by the project manager. So every Teamlet has a product manager. We have 3 project managers on board. So usually each product manager is actually owning multiple Teamlets, and they control the direction. And then the overall vision and ideas and stuff comes from head of product and the rest of us. And that's kind of how it goes.
Hi, I have a question for Ken. You kind of alluded to the shift from the waterfall process to what you finally described. And I'm guessing you're going from that transition from this slow process to this continuous deployment thing. You probably face some management pushback, or probably pushback from people who are used to that idea. And how did you overcome that hurdle, or was there some kind of transition that made it a little bit smoother?
I think, as I said, I sort of came in at the tail end of what was sort of the previous process that was a bit more waterfall-y, and I think a lot of people, my read of it was that a lot of people were sort of frustrated. That most people wanted to try to move faster. I don't think I don't think a lot of people realized that we would get to where we're deploying 30 times a day, just sort of this constant roll of the code base. They just knew they wanted to go a little faster, and what could they do to make that happen? And then they got to where they could deploy once a day, and they wanted to go a little faster. And I think what we really had to do as we've gone through that transition is make sure that we've developed the tools to have the insight into the site to keep up with changing that fast. Right? You really have to shorten the feedback loop to match the development cycle that you're trying to have. And I think any pushback that we felt as we sort of ramped up the process was just around making sure that kept up. Right? If we didn't have enough insight into things, people started getting nervous, and we would have to flesh up those tools and then go back at it.
Got one over here.
Yeah. Thank you all for wonderful panelists for sharing. This is a question for Naveen. I know many businesses have using Foursquare as a marketing platform. I would like to know what's your marketing, what do you do to market yourself? Given that 50% of the traffic from international, and you have a team based in US, and how do you market yourself internationally? What has proven successful? And what's your average user acquisition cost? Thanks.
I have no idea what the user acquisition cost is. So the way we grew the team is that we didn't really have a PR team or a marketing person on board until probably a year and a half into our growth. We brought them both on around September, October of last year. You can see why Susan made a difference. And we don't really focus too much on, getting ads and buying AdWords, for instance, or billboards or any of these things. I think the way this Foursquare story has been told has been through our users. And we sort of naturally tapped into that. So the users are, they add all the venues, for instance. They get appointed to be super users to clean up things in their community. They self-organize events, meetups, things like Foursquare Day. So we naturally just tap into them. So we appoint some of them as ambassadors so that they can go and sell to businesses. We've been very lucky in that brands want to tap into this resource, this interesting idea called Foursquare. So we made all the tools to make it easy for them to come and help themselves. So all these tools are actually self-serve, so we don't actually have to get the phone out and call someone. So if you want a page on Foursquare, you can come and set it up on your own. And then we just provide hints on how to go market it, go advertise it. As far as international, we work occasionally here and there with carriers, and the carriers do the same thing. They I don't know what you call it. They basically put us on their decks, and they put us in their kind of marketing materials to call attention to this idea of checking in and location, all this stuff. Because in the end, it's good for them. It leads to more usage of their phones and their platform. That's basically what we've done. We basically tapped into what people naturally want. We haven't gone above and beyond and started, kind of plastering billboards everywhere.
Question for Ken. Does your rapid deployment extend to all parts of your site? I'm thinking mainly about sensitive areas like user profiles and e-commerce transactions. And if so, how do you deal with PCI compliance and other regulatory issues around it?
Yeah, so there are pretty much two main exceptions. One of them is PCI. And there's no getting around that. I mean, there's a way containing that. I mean, PCI is sort of mandated process. There's no skirting that or collapsing it, really. You just have to sort of, our approach has been just to try to make sure that we cordon it off and, it only sort of affects the systems that need to be PCI compliant, that we don't let it leak out and affect systems that just, that don't need to really, conform to that. The other is obviously schema changes. You can't really continuously deploy schema changes, especially on a large data set. You might try to run an alter and it might need to take 8 or 16 hours. So that part of what we do once a week, and it's a pretty long day for ops, pretty much every week, because the data set is fairly significant. But the interesting part about it, the interesting part that sort of stands out to me is that with the way that we actually develop, we've actually managed to work out a way very naturally to make sure that we can separate schema changes from changes in code, even though intrinsically they're very dependent. And to me, that's always been one of the trickier parts of more complex launches, where you build up many changes over time and then try to push it out. Is that you have this chicken and egg situation with schema changes and code that depend on the schema changes going out. And by having a continuous sort of deployment schedule and then sort of a weekly schema schedule, you have to separate them. You don't have a choice. And so it's a problem that you sort of solved in the course of doing business that I always found very difficult to solve outside of this kind of process.
Got one over here, guys.
Hi, Ken, another one for you. So regarding the way you configure like the if else and conditionally include code, while it appeals to my inner cowboy, I wonder how you control spaghetti down the line. Like, do you go through and you clean the code up down the line, or how do you age those things out?
Yeah, that's a real problem. I mean, that takes discipline, which is it's discipline, right? it's here some days, it's gone the others. I mean, I think the real truth of it is that it hasn't mattered quite as much as one might have feared. That ending up with a little bit of unreachable code in your code base is a pretty acceptable trade-off to actually building out new and useful features and actually evolving your site pretty quickly. But periodically we do have to go through and make sure that we clean up old feature flags and delete old code and just sort of audit what's going on. And I mean, the thing is, you can sort of do that in a rolling way. And you're typically, whenever you're going in and making changes, especially around configuration changes, they're usually pretty contained. And so you know that you're going to come through and do a major round of development on, say, Etsy treasuries or something like that. And then once you're through and it's rested for a little while and you come back in with a bug fix, it's pretty easy to go ahead and delete out a little bit of old code that's in an unreachable branch and behind the config flag that that you're never going to turn off. But I mean, it's something that we have to watch out for.
Thank you, speakers, for the great stuff tonight. I actually have a question for Jessica. I went to your Unwide Tech Meetup last night, you hosted, and I think out of the 9 or 10 presentations, you mentioned tonight, one is one-pager, the other is TaskRabbit. Why did you choose those two? Why do you think they should be in your PowerPoint slide? And what are the other ones you think worth mentioning?
I think there are a lot of companies that are worth mentioning. I think I was looking back through and preparing for this presentation, actually looking line by line through our entire spreadsheet of all the different companies that fall into the categories that I'm seeing trending. And so those two companies in particular were really good examples of trends that we're seeing. And we had Zarly demo last month, and there are a lot of people that, one of the questions last night to TaskRabbit was, how are you different than Zarly? And one of the questions to Zarly was, how are you different than TaskRabbit? And we kind of did that on purpose because we like seeing sometimes back-to-back people that are doing different iterations of the same type of company or something that's trying to solve the same type of challenge. And, but yeah, those were just, I think, really good examples that illustrated the points I was making about the trends that we're seeing.
I have another question for Jessica. I actually found very interesting when you mentioned asking non-static questions when hiring. And you mentioned asking them, oh, what did they do as kids, or things like that. Can you kind of elaborate on that? Because I think it's really interesting to see how you can get at things that are kind of hard to reach in an interview, and how you think about questions to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think people avoid those questions because they get scared, because at least what I was taught in sort of standard management practice was you really had to stick to asking questions that related to the resume, or that someone would see directly related to the position. But that was a really narrow mindset. So, you know, if you thought about it as only asking questions about what your skill set was as a developer in certain areas, then you're not getting to know anything about the person. And when you really think about what encompasses the entire skill set needed for a position, it's not just the technical skills, it's not just the skills you see on the resume. You know, in Foursquare, for instance, they don't want to hire anybody who doesn't have a sense of humor and an ability to add some levity to a situation, because they'd sit scowling in the corner on Tuesdays when everybody's wearing sweatbands. You know, you need to find people that are going to appreciate that and add to that instead of detracting from it. So you might ask questions in an interview about, you know, what's the silliest Halloween costume that you've ever had, or things that would help bring out whatever that person's personality is. And there are, in general, only a small group of questions that you really can't ask in an interview. And beyond that, if you can really connect the questions that you're asking to the core values of the company, and that's actually part of the reason why core values are important, because if you can show, so say you ask a kind of strange question like, you know, what kind of things did you like to do as a kid? If someone wanted to come back and try to sue you for, you know, improper hiring practices, if you can show that that's somehow connected to how your company functions on a daily basis, how you hire people, how you work with people, if you've got core values written down that connect to that type of question, then you've got a pretty good platform to stand on in terms of supporting why it's okay for you to ask that in an interview.
Before we jump, Naveen and Ken, do you have anything as far as interviewing practices that you, specific questions or things that you guys like to do?
Yeah, I agree with Jessica. There are a few questions that you can't ask because they're against employment laws or something like that. But what you want to do is, I usually end up closing interviews. You know, you ask the technical questions, you ask the product questions, you ask, you know, like philosophical questions. How do you think about X design and coding? And then we usually close with, like, you know, are they going to be a good fit? Like, are they going to not necessarily wear sweatbands, but like, are they going to be a good fit and like be able to communicate well with the rest of the team? Be able to understand the product, right? Be able to understand the future vision, and do they have a shared interest in the future vision? Or are they just looking to join up so that they can put something on their resume and then leave? Are they going to be here for the long term? We all are in it for the long term, so you want to kind of try to suss out all of those things. You could be a really smart person, but maybe you just want to be back at school, right? Maybe you want to go get a PhD. So the idea is like to get like a sense of like the soft feel, the soft kind of skills, I guess. You know, what are you into? How are you going to contribute? How do you react with teams? That kind of stuff.
So I mean, personally, for the hard skills, I personally like to see candidates type at a computer as much as possible. So, you know, for my interview, I put them in front of the computer. We typically ask for code samples. We get them to walk through code, ask them to solve a few quasi-original problems, just to get them typing and to see how it is that how they do their business, right? You can learn a lot about a person that way.
And for the software stuff, it's really challenging. It's really challenging to suss out software skills in people in an interview. It's almost like speed dating, right? You've got a couple of hours at best to determine if you're going to be, compatible. Personally, I mean, the best thing that I know to do is try to go on history. I really try to look at what they've done historically and try to see if that matches up to what I would want them to do at Etsy. And I don't mean technically. I mean, like, are they stable? Are they bouncing around? Are they working on things that sort of show a line of interest through their career? I think that's that's sort of how I personally approach it.
I guess a couple more things to add is like you can't say things like obviously is this person too old to work here, but what you want to try to get at is one of the things I ask is like, do you use the product? And we actually go and make sure like have they checked in before, right? Is this the first time you're going to do it? And that's okay if it's the first time. There are a couple of people that we've hired that's been the first time that they've ever done it, and I think the second thing I was going to mention is I forgot what it was. Sorry. It's been a long day.
Okay, hello, I'm Vitaly, I'm from Russia, and sorry for my English, it's not so well, and the night becomes worse. And first of all, I want to say thanks for all of you, and Ken for thinking existing revision systems and for branches in code. It's very well. For Jessica for yesterday's event and tech meetup, it was really great, and I'm very glad to visit it and to know you. And of course Naveen for Foursquare and for Teamlet and another interesting thing you say. So my question is, Jessica said that at the beginning of presentation, who do you know any developers? And it's for Russia, and I really didn't expect that for New York it's a problem to find developers. And maybe you can, it's a question for all of you, maybe you have some advices how to build developer ecosystem, developer culture in the city, because developers and entrepreneurs, it's people who didn't meet so much, and maybe you have some advices how to build developer culture. And this is my question. Thank you.
I actually remember. Can I answer the last question and I'll come to yours? So the last thing I was going to mention is, and this is really important. So the interview is as much as about you questioning them and like trying to get a sense of can they be a good fit. And I think if they're really smart, part of their role in being an interview is like, do I really want to work here? So they're slightly there to kind of make sure, is this guy okay? Is the team okay? Is he just making stuff up? Like they really should be thinking that kind of stuff. So part of your role as actually the interview is to sell your company a little bit and to close it. So as a closer, like I did 2 today. I was just like, do you have any other questions? You have to ask them, and then you basically have to sell the company, no matter who you are, about how great it is to work there, about the problem sets, about the interesting things. So that's important. And as far as your question, I guess the simplest thing to say is like developers go where other developers are, right? So the reason Google has a great developer culture is because there are a lot of really smart developers there. So if I'm really smart, I want to be smarter, I want to go join something like Google. And that's kind of what we're trying to build with Foursquare. We want a whole bunch of really great developers, all the best in the city at Foursquare. Etsy is the same way, they have one of the best teams in the city. And the idea there is that really smart guys go work with other really smart guys. I don't know who it is that said this, like A players work with A players. B players, if they're smart, aspire to go work with A players. But A players are never going to go work for B teams and C teams. That's exactly how it works. Developers only want 2 things. I'm convinced, I mean, at some point, I don't really think it's about money or fame or any one of these things. I'm convinced that developers only want 2 things. They want to work with other really smart guys, and they want to work on some really amazing problems. They don't really care about anything else. I mean, obviously, a powerful computer is like $3,000. It's not a lot of money. They don't really care about all the other things in life. The number 1 and 2 things, am I working with great guys? Am I working on good things? And that's kind of the culture that you should be aiming towards. So at Foursquare, to give an example, and you guys can talk about this as well, we have great problem sets. So I talk about the problem sets anytime we have interviews or anytime we're actually going out and pitching stuff. We have amazing data. We have like 600 million data points. We have millions of users, and we keep adding to this. We have millions of relationships. Every time you go to check in, we look up so much data. We look up where you've been, have you been there before, who your friends are they there, are there events there, have you unlocked badges there? There's just all this rich data. Now, how do you build that? How do you build that for 10 million people? How do you build that for 100 million people? So these are the things that get people excited. And secondly, again, that whole thing that I was saying where we hired friends, they hired their friends. This is how it works. Developer tells their friends. They're also really smart guys. They come join your team.
I agree wholeheartedly. That's absolutely true. I think also, when you're talking about startups, you're actually trying to attract a particular kind of developer, and on the whole, you're trying to attract a developer that wants to have an impact and who wants to make a mark and see their work actually affect a product and affect users. And I think one of the main challenges for startups as they grow is the fact that as you actually grow out a development team with people like that, you have to make more and more room in your product for them to have impact, right? Strong developers who are capable of building out new and innovative product don't want to get cut out of the loop, right? They want to have some influence over what's going on, and you have to find a way to make that happen, even as you get more and more of them around. There get to be a lot of people who want to have influence over what's being done, and that's one of the main challenges and one of the main things that I think we mean whenever we say dev culture, right? How is it that we're actually trying to organize our businesses so that more and more impactful people can actually affect positively the product we're trying to build?
Yeah, and I think to add to what Naveen was saying, I think a lot of what we were thinking when we started the Made in New York program, for instance, was helping people to see who's here in New York building things. Because I think a lot of times within startup world, people see these big launches, they see more of the product than they see things actually being built. And so we really wanted to focus on the fact that stuff is actually being built here. There are engineers here building things, not just entrepreneurs coming up with ideas for things. And we're already seeing people really starting to love that idea, and that idea growing, and the list growing. And we're working with the city and with other startups in the city to actually start doing some things to kind of get the word out about the fact that there are a lot of engineers here working on really interesting problems. It does take a certain type of engineer to want to come work for a startup. So it's not about telling people that the only place you should go is work for a startup, but talking to a college kid from Dartmouth who only got to see Goldman Sachs and he doesn't know anything about startups, helping him understand what the broad spectrum of options are for him at graduation, and if he's the type of guy that would be a great fit for a startup, I want him to have that information so that he can come here and join one of the teams at a startup in New York. So we're working on doing that and working on helping people see that they can come here and get those two things, get challenging problems and challenging things to work on, and lots of interesting people to work with.
So we'll have one more question.
I can go, yes, thank you. So my question is along those lines on the other side, and it's for Rebecca. What questions would you recommend that the developers ask companies to figure out if there will be a good role, especially if there's not much of a website or product going on because they're a startup?
That actually might be a question that you guys might be able to answer a little better.
Sure. Why were you saying that? I guess maybe because we've been there since the beginning. We've had to do this since the beginning, since we were 2 people and now we're 80. And obviously the pitch changes, but at every moment, especially when we're much smaller, at the very end of the interview, it's as much as it is about you questioning them, it's a time for them to ask you questions. And I guess the best way to do it is you have to ask a little bit of probably what VCs ask is like, can this team actually go build what they say they're going to build? That's really important, right? So you got to do your research on the team. What have they done in the past? How they talk about things, how they talk about product, how they talk about vision. Are they actually thinking big picture, or is it just like very, very close and kind of not even thinking about the things you're thinking about? Do you get along with them? when the company's really small, it's more important that you get along with them. Or it's also important that you can actually speak up and have like your opinion heard, right? When it gets bigger, things change. And I guess lastly, it's just lastly, you just don't know. Maybe I'll just give the wild card there. You just don't know which way a company's going to go. This is true. I mean, even great teams sometimes, takes them a couple of iterations to actually get there. And you just never know. So you just have to like do as much research as you can, and then just a little bit of just hunch in your gut kind of tells you to go choose it.
And I think some of it too is how do the people that are interviewing you react when you ask a lot of questions? So, do they seem open to having a conversation with you about their company, about the future? Do they seem kind of honest and engaged about the questions that you're asking? And maybe they can't reveal everything in the interview process, but if they seem willing to take the time to actually answer and engage in a conversation and don't just seem like, well, you should want to work for us, like no matter what. If they want to have that conversation, I think that's a really good indication that they're interested in being engaged with whoever they hire and bring on their team.
So folks, actually this is not the end. There is two more things. One, we have cocktails, but before that I also wanted to mention, we could only squeeze in so much time, so I'm sure there are two kinds of people here, people who are developers and engineers, really want to learn even more about how to build and be part of a great engineering culture, and there are managers and folks who want to learn more about that. So I would say come visit us at the New York Times, come visit some more events. To take Naveen's cue, the Times has a pretty amazing engineering and technology culture. Whether you are interested in applying for a job or you just want to come visit and see how we do things here, please do that. We host events like this. I really want to thank all the engineers who helped organize this event. It really shows a passion that they have for their job. Feels like a professional event management team would have managed this. So with that, I open it up. I think some of the folks might stick around, so we're happy to answer any questions from the speakers or about the New York Times culture as well. Thank you all for coming.